In a previous video, we have discussed the story points estimation and how to estimate user stories. Story points are very useful as it helps the team to define their velocity. The velocity is the measure of how many story points the team can take into a single sprint and is the key metric in Scrum. Velocity is calculated at the end of the sprint by totaling the points for all fully completed user stories. The velocity will be used during the sprint planning to define how many user stories the team can take on during the sprint. And tracking the team's velocity helps predicting the team's capacity for the upcoming sprints. By experience, teams take 3 to 4 iterations to find their stable velocity. Tracking your team's velocity helps you turn your estimation units into actual time and cost for the business. This can be simply done when we know the velocity of the team. Another advantage I'll point out about using story points and tracking velocity is the way they naturally account for the difference between an ideal 8 hours workday and the interrupted full of meetings day. Team velocity represents the team's capacity with all the messy details of real-work situations already accounted for. Beside the velocity, Scrum team uses story point to track their progress using the burndown chart. On one axis, it represents the number of story points the team took during a sprint, and the other axis represents the number of days in one sprint. A burndown chart is a graphic representation of how quickly the team is working with their user stories. The ideal flow of completing the user stories in the sprint is by having this straight line. In this example, the team has 25 story points in their sprint and will run a sprint of 2 weeks, which is 10 days sprint. Every day, during the daily Scrum, the team will discuss how many story points they have accomplished in the previous day, and then draw the line by removing the amount of story points completed. Sprint burndown will help the team to see very quickly whether they are on track or not. If after a couple of days, the team see that they are above the ideal line, they need to find ways to come back on track. Otherwise, they will not be able to finish their user stories. And if they are way below the ideal line, that means they might finish their user stories before the end of the sprint, and they can ask the product owner to take on another user story. Story points are also useful for product owners when discussing planning and costs with the stakeholders through the use of the burn-up charts. On one axis, we have the number of story points we have in the product backlog. The other axis represents the sprints. As said earlier, teams need 3 to 4 sprints to have a stable velocity and enough good data. The product owner can use this data on the predictability of the team. Let's take this example. The team has delivered 18 story points in the first sprint, 20 in the second, 15 in the third sprint, and 22 on the fourth sprint. In this example, we see that the team has delivered in average 18.75 story points. As a minimum, they delivered 15 story points, and as a maximum, they delivered 22 story points. Based on this data, the product owner can draw the predictive line if the team always delivers on average every sprint, another line if they always deliver the minimum, and the last line if they always deliver on the maximum. Now, there is 2 ways product owners can engage with stakeholders using the burn-up chart. We either speak about date-driven planning. The stakeholder asks what can be delivered in Sprint 7, for example. By simply drawing the lines at the intersection of each other delivery line, the product owner can tell the stakeholders that by Sprint 7, the team will be able to deliver between 108 and 158 story points. The product owner can then show to the stakeholders the use of stories from the product backlog that will fit in this estimation. Another way to use the sprint burn-up chart is with the scope-driven planning. If the stakeholder asks the product owner by when the team can deliver the minimum viable product, the product owner can then look at the use of stories that fit in the minimum viable product and see how many story points. Assuming it is 135, with the rodent lines to the intersection of the delivery lines, the product owner can then tell the stakeholder that the MVP will be delivered between Sprint 7 and Sprint 9. A very important point to not forget when showing these data to your stakeholders is that this is not exact science, but predictions based on the data you have today. The more you work on your product, the more data you get, and the more precise you can be. Based on this burn-up chart, the product owner can give an estimation of budget required for the minimum viable product, for example. As shown in this scope-driven planning, we see that the MVP can be delivered between Sprint 7 and Sprint 9. And knowing the number of people working in the team during the sprint, we can have the cost of the sprint. We simply need to multiply the cost of the sprint by the number of sprints required to deliver the MVP to have the cost of the MVP. I hope this video gave you a good understanding about the importance of using the story points and how to use the different metrics to engage with your stakeholders and have good conversations. Follow us for more contents. Thank you.